You're right.
All right. So can you please give me the introduction and explain how is GP care organized in the Netherlands? So here we have a couple of sub-questions that I will ask you after. You can use them as a guidance, or you can just explain and then we'll go through.
Yeah.
After.
Okay, I have some questions.
So we're kind of.
So yeah, okay. So I can start with how it's organized.
Yes,
certainly.
Please go ahead.
So we have a country of about 15 million people. And we have 12,000 GPs. So one GP, in average, will serve 2,250 patients.
Mm-hmm.
If he works full-time equivalents, but most GPs will not work full-time equivalents. So most will work 60, 70 or 80% of the week time. GPs are organized most of the time in practices in which they partner with colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
We have now, if you have a look at the Dutch situation and you look at practices, we have about 1/3, a bit less than 1/3 soloist practices.
Mm-hmm.
One third is duo practices, so 2 GP partners, and about 40% is more than 2 GPs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you turn that around and look at the GPs, then only 10%, about 15% works as a soloist, 20 or 30 as a duo, so as a 2 GPs working, and the majority will work with 3 or more GPs.
Okay, I see.
That's how it's organized. Most of the GP practices are, you could say, private partnerships. So GPs are not salaried, but work for themselves. And I'm not aware of the exact amount of GPs that works salaried within the practice. So they, for example, there are some health centers with a director, and it's otherwise organized, but there's only a few where doctors are salaried. And there might also be health centers where just private partnerships exist within the health centers. So majority partnerships, majority duo or more GPs within a practice, and all of them will, almost all of them will be private.
Okay.
And at this moment, we have, if you look at the total amount of GPs, we have about 80% of the GPs who have their own practice, and about 1 in 5 will be salaried or will work as a how do you call it, as GPs who will work when another doctor is ill, or they will work in the out-of-hours services, or they will. So there might be young GPs looking for an own practice, working as a substitute elsewhere.
Okay, and but when we speak about these practices of 2 GPs or 3 or more GPs, are they all individually independent, or they all work from the legal perspective, or they all work for one practice?
No, most of them will be independent. So there will be only 2 or 3 GPs owning their own practice. So they will not be dependent on a larger organization, or not be organized otherwise. There are a few. We have, I think it's about only, we're talking now about maybe 200,000 people in the Netherlands who are served by, how you say it, more like, we have this independer, it's called, I think. It's 10 practices in The Hague. And we have one insurer, which is Menzies. Also organized about 20 centers with the help of an investor. So, but that's very few.
Okay.
The large majority is private and owned by the GPs themselves.
Okay. So even these groups, it's 3 GPs working for one legal entity.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, yes, here we have this question about the ownership status. We mentioned it, but are GPs required to be legally independent to have their autonomy, or it's historical practice to be independent with no legal requirements?
Yes, it's historical. It's not legal because there are private undertakers, as the ones I mentioned, who can hire GPs and also have practices or also but it's just how it developed. I think we have there's some points because as a GP you will have to have a contract with the insurers. So but there are not so many limits to that. So most of the GPs, if they can show to the insurer that they have a practice, they have their own you call it they have their papers to be a GP, and then you will get quite easily a contract from the insurer, and of course we have an inspection from the government which will look if there is cause any harm to the population, but it always used to be like that. So people will, if I was a GP 50 years ago, I would just go to a village, buy a house and have my practice and go to the insurer, say, I want to be a GP.
Yes.
Can I get a contract? And you got those contracts. And in former days, we had we had this private patients and non-private patients, but that has disappeared in the past 15 years. But I think it's mostly historically grown like that, and there is some resistance also against larger organizations or larger investors taking over, as they call it, GP care.
Okay, we will get that to a second, but just let me ask you before we move on. So the insurance company is the key payer. You as a GP get money from the insurance company and not from the patient.
No, if you look at our there's a financial situation, we get that let's say about 100% will come from insurers of our income and our money which comes into the practice will be almost exclusively from insurers.
I see. So this point. So you said that GP practices can be owned by private or commercial organizations, right?
It can, yes, it can. Yeah, it is possible. We have a few, as I mentioned. So
independent, right?
Yeah, they're independent and investors who have, and sometimes it was because I know in the eastern part of the country it was sometimes difficult to have successors. So if a GP stopped, it would be too difficult to get somebody who would take over and had to invest money in a practice and move to that area. Yeah. So that's when the and also in the inner city of The Hague, there was a problem because people didn't want to be a GP there. Yeah. So and then those private investors came in to the business and took over some practices and made good. They took care of the requirements. They took care of the practice. Took care of the contracts, and the GPs could only do their work in the salaried.
So these GPs would be salaried by the
in those practices where investors came in and who own more practices. The GPs will be salaried. Yes.
Okay.
And you have also, as I told you, some health centers where GPs will be salaried.
Okay. And those health centers, are they private or public? I mean,
no, they're not private. Not private.
Okay.
It's most of the time it's some kind of what you call a stichting in the Netherlands. It's how do you call that in English? A foundation.
Okay.
So there will be a foundation of non-commercial people, and there will be a board of non-commercial interest.
I see. Okay, so how do GPs refer patients to specialist care? Do they refer patients to a specialist clinic or hospital, or to any clinic or hospital?
Yeah, you can do both.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, if GPs refer patients, so first of all, patients can't go to specialist care without a referral.
Of course.
So that's a rule. As GPs are gatekeepers in primary care in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So you have to have a referral from your GP, and GPs might choose both. So sometimes we will refer to a hospital. Most of the time, we will refer to a hospital. But for certain medical problems or certain medical conditions, there might be alternatives and send people to private clinics. And most of them are, for example, which have, you call it in English, the DBC. So that are the packages of, for example, cataract care or new hip or new knee or so orthopedics and dermatology and ophthalmology. Those are the specialist areas where private clinics have come up actually, but they are to some extent that is limited still. There are quite some of them, but their work is the amount of work which is done in those clinics is quite limited if you compare it to hospitals.
And can you refer to any hospital or specific hospitals that you have a contract with or something?
No, it's not about we contracting hospitals. It's about insurers contracting hospitals. It used to be completely free. But about 5 years ago, insurers started to buy in different kinds of hospitals. There are certainly some limits to that. So if you refer a patient, you get a message back, I'm not allowed to do this for this patient. But it is only a small amount in which and it's also for those conditions as I mentioned. So, example for cataract or for osteoarthritis or something that they want to, but it's only to a limited amount. But that's because of the insurers contract hospitals for certain conditions, and not there's not a GP involved in this contracting.
Okay.